Are you ready?
Let's go.
From AMI Central.
Now circling in the neutral zone.
Here's the pitch on the way. 36 yards for the win.
This.
Here comes a big chance. The shot.
Is
this the dagger?
The neutral zone.
Home run.
This is as good as it gets.
Now, here's your host, two-time Paralympian, Brock Richardson.
What's going on? It's time for another edition of the Neutral Zone. I am indeed your host, Brock Richardson, and I am one of a half that's with you today, as Cam Jenkins will be heard from in mere moments. Claire was unable to join us today due to some family circumstances, so she will be along on the program in the coming weeks, but she's unable to join us today. Coming up on today's show, we speak with Mike Davies, who works as the sports director for the Peterborough Examiner. We get his feelings on how the Peterborough Petes were so successful, and then Cameron and I will weigh in on our thoughts with the interview, plus we give you some feedback on the Wheelchair Basketball World Championships, plus the NHL Finals and NBA Finals. Lots coming up on today's program. Let's get into it with our
Neutral Zone headlines.
A huge congratulations goes out to para-national rugby player and Canadian para-ice hockey player and her very own Claire Buchanan for recently being inducted into the Toronto Sports Hall of Fame. Claire has been on para teams for both para ice hockey, as it was mentioned, and wheelchair basketball as well. She's always been a leader in the LGBTQ plus community as well. So congratulations, Claire.
Recently, the Toronto Blue Jays have made some significant roster moves. They sent starting pitcher Alek Manoah down to the minors after giving up 6 runs in the first inning in a recent game against the Houston Astros. They then followed that up by taking a right-handed pitcher, Mitch White, off of the 60-day DL, and followed that up by designating Anthony Bass for assignment. What that means is that he's placed on waivers, and the Blue Jays have up to 7 days to either trade him or he just goes on to waivers and another team can pick him up, or they can't. The team has said after the 7 days, they have no interest in bringing him back.
The Anaheim Ducks have hired first-time NHL head coach Greg Cronin. Previously, Cronin held assistant coaching positions with the Leafs and the Islanders before taking over as head coach of the Colorado Eagles in the AHL.
The Wheelchair Basketball World Championships have begun in Dubai. Let's tell you about the pools for this portion of our show. The women's side, Canada will be joined with Brazil, China, Australia, Spain, and Great Britain. On the men's side, we have Egypt, Germany, and Thailand. This is because there are more teams on the men's side, so that's why you see a smaller pool, men's versus women's. Let's give you a place to go if you want to look up some full results. For full results, go to www.iwbf.org/event/2022 IWBF World Championships. You can also go to Wheelchair Basketball Canada for full updates, or the IWBF YouTube page, which has the full list of games which you can cast on YouTube. Best of luck to everybody, and we'll give you more details later on in the program. We also want to tell you that Nick Taylor becomes the first Canadian to win the RBC Open since 1954. Congratulations to him, as he was part of a 4-hole tiebreaker. It was quite something to behold. Those are your headlines for this week. And Cameron, we're going to be discussing today in our chat topic that another MLB team cuts ties with a pitcher following a controversial tweet. Let's take a listen to this clip.
Matt Dermody was cut by the Boston Red Sox a day after he made his first Major League start and said he regretted making a homophobic tweet 2 years ago. The 32-year-old left-hander was designated for assignment as part of a flurry of roster moves. Boston has 7 days to trade him or place him on waivers. This comes after Toronto cut pitcher Anthony Bass earlier Friday, one day after the right-handed reliever said he didn't think an anti-LGBTQ+ social media post he shared last month was hateful. I'm Geffen Coolbaugh.
So, a couple of places to go here. For the second straight situation, an MLB club has designated somebody for assignment due to the fact that they've made some homophobic / hateful comments. Here's my question for you in today's chat topic, and that's, because of this, do you think the MLB needs to take further action to prevent this from happening in the future? If so, what are those further steps in your mind, Cam Jenkins?
I don't know what further steps they would need to do in anticipation of this happening. Other than, like everything with sports, you would have to put it in the collective bargaining agreement and put some sort of verbiage in there that you can't hate other or say anything hateful towards any other community or any sort of nationality, any other person. I think that's the only way that they could really do something about it, and maybe put it in there that if you do say something like hate speech, that, you get a game suspension or 2 game suspension or whatever that is. And they can do it like the doping where, first offense is this many games, second offense this many games, maybe third offense, X amount of games. So that would be my opinion.
I would agree. I think, and it would be tough to put this in the collective bargaining agreement because that the Major League Baseball and its owners are like oil and water. They're one of the 2 owners and leagues that really, truly don't get along with each other. I agree with you. I think there does need to be something put in writing in the collective bargaining agreement that we just can't have this in our game. We need to be more receptive to various communities, and in this case we're talking about the LGBTQ+2 community, but this goes racially, everything in my opinion. And I just think we've now seen this twice in the last less than 2 weeks, because we were talking about it last week on the program with Anthony Bass, and I just I think I'm getting to a point where I'm like tired of it. And because I'm tired of it, that's where I lean towards, and I say, yeah, Cameron, I agree with you. Putting something in the collective bargaining agreement is something you should do. Is it something that's attainable? Maybe not, with how hard it is for those 2 sides to communicate, but something really needs to be done because...
But when you're negotiating as far as the CBA goes, if the management or if the owners really want to put that in, then they've got to be willing to give up something else to the players. So it's all a negotiation. So if they really want it to happen, the owners could do that. But what's the hill they want to stand on, because you're going to have to give something up if they want that in there. So, it's possible. I just don't know what the players would want in return.
Well, and as we've said many times in different ways in this program, if, we'll take the neutral zone since that's what we're doing and that's what you're watching and listening to at the moment. If Cameron and or I or Claire or Josh had any sort of hate speech or something that was untoward, we would be reprimanded, and we would be, whether we'd be, let go would remain to be seen, because I don't think anybody's taking that kind of risk on this program, but we certainly would be reprimanded because AMI doesn't stand for that. And I just think that, professional athletes need to also recognize that society gets held at a standard. So they should also be held at a standard. And to me, it's not up to the organization to make that decision. Certainly it falls on them because you're the organization that, employed them and did that. But to me, Major League Baseball does need to stand and say, this is where we stand on this. If you do this, X punishment will take place, because the rest of society has to be accountable for what they say, and so do athletes, in my opinion.
Yeah, but do you think that, because a lot of people are using the word woke or cancel culture, like myself, I think everybody should be included. I have a lot of, or some friends that are a part of the LGBTQ plus community, and they're always a safe space to come talk to me and to be around me. But at the same time, if a person doesn't believe in that, I think it's okay to not believe in that as well. However, I think you've got to be very careful on, how you say that when you're out in the public. But I think it's okay if you don't believe in that lifestyle and to say basically that you would never do that. But I think that what you also have to know and say is that if other people choose to live that lifestyle, that's okay for them, but I wouldn't do it myself.
Yeah.
And, to leave it at that. But once you start doing hate speech, or once you start to really try to push your views on somebody that, has the LGBTQ plus lifestyle, that's wrong, because everybody, can make their own decisions at the end of the day and what they want to do. So, and good for everybody to be able to have the choice to do that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think everybody has their beliefs, and you're allowed to believe in, your beliefs are just as important as anybody else's, but in certain circumstances, you really have to manage how you say it and the platform in which you hold. And I think that's a standard that sometimes people take a bit too far or not far enough, depending on any given circumstance. If you like what you've heard in this segment or anything else, and you want to reach us on Twitter, here's how you can do that.
And welcome back to the Neutral Zone AMI broadcast booth. And we are set to get this ball game underway. The first pitch brought to you by Brock Richardson's Twitter account at NeutralZoneBR. First pitch, strike. And hey, gang, why not strike up a Twitter chat with Claire Buchanan for the Neutral Zone? Find her at Neutral Zone CB. And there's a swing and a chopper out to second base, right at Claire. She picks up the ball, throws it over to first base for a routine out. And fans, there is nothing routine about connecting with Cam and Josh from the Neutral Zone. At Neutral Zone Cam J and at J Watson 200. Now that's a winning combination. And this Oregon interlude is brought to you by AMI Audio on Twitter. Get in touch with the Neutral Zone. Type in at AMI Audio.
We are so pleased to be joined by Mike Davies, who is a blind reporter. He currently works for the Peterborough Examiner as the sports director. Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure, Brock.
Where did your passion for hockey come from?
I think Hockey Night in Canada as a little kid sitting in front of the TV with my dad watching TV, watching the hockey games on Saturday night. Back then, in 1972, 73, in that time frame, you didn't have the choice of games on TV that you do today. So it was Saturday night, Toronto Maple Leafs, and that was it. And so I was a huge Leaf fan as a little kid.
Can you give us a little bit of background on how you became interested on becoming a reporter?
I think growing up, I just wanted to do something sports related. Like I wanted to do something that I was going to enjoy, and sports was sort of my passion. So initially I didn't know exactly how I was going to do that because I wasn't a great athlete, so I knew that I wasn't going to do it that way. And then when I was in university, I was going to university here in Peterborough, Trent University, my local university. I'd just taken general arts courses. Wasn't totally sure what career path I was going to be on. I ended up working actually for the Peterborough Petes as a statistician. I went and offered my services if they needed anything, just thinking maybe there was a foot in the door with the Petes, maybe that could lead to something. And what it did lead to actually was me traveling with the team and sitting on the bus right next to Mike Brophy, who was the Examiner reporter covering the Petes at that time. And I got to know Mike really well. And I'd always been able to write pretty decently, and it was sort of through my friendship with Mike that I began to think, well, maybe that's what I can do. Maybe that's my ticket. And I kind of went from there. I applied for, when I'd done university, I applied for a part-time opening at the Examiner, got hired on their news side as a news reporter to begin with. And 3 years later, transitioned into the sports department and just finished my 28th season covering the Peterborough Petes.
For those that might not know, can you tell us a little bit about the Peterborough Examiner?
It's well over 100 years that the Examiner has been going in Peterborough. As people may be aware, it's a tough time in the newspaper industry, and some cities are losing their daily papers. There's no daily paper in Guelph anymore. The Guelph Mercury closed. It became something different. Oshawa lost its daily paper quite a long time ago, almost 30 years ago. So the Peterborough Examiner, we're alive and kicking, and still covering sports locally, and it's been 100 plus years that we've been going.
What do you feel the easiest part of your job is?
I get to watch sports for a living and write about it, right? And it's a job that a lot of people would like to have, and I know I've heard that from a lot of people. And so I think the easiest part is just getting to enjoy and watch things that you enjoy doing.
Right there with you. I get to work in a field that I love. It's my excuse to say, listen, I have to watch sports right now. It's part of my job. It's something I never thought that I would get to say. So really, really cool that we share something in common there.
What do you feel is the most challenging part of your job, and how do you overcome it?
Well, it's become dealing with the sight issues. When I first started the job, I could see pretty well. I was driving at the time, and write my stories without any need for any sort of accessible devices or anything. I knew that over the course of time that would change. I didn't know how long it would happen. I have retinitis pigmentosa, so it sort of affects people in different ways at different stages of their lives and in different timelines, I guess. And so, I started to notice a few things just around the turn of the century. Had to give up driving in 2001. And then it's just been maybe in the last 5 years that it started to become to the point where it's starting to become a challenge for me seeing the sports and also seeing the computer, right? So now I'm using a screen reader a lot, having the stories read back to me. So I'm editing it that way to make sure that I haven't got typos and spelling mistakes and that sort of thing. And you probably found this, Brock, like no matter how many accessible devices you have on your computer, none of them are perfect. There's always some things that they don't really quite work perfectly with, so there's still, you still almost need a little bit of sight to be able to navigate the computer. And as that sight gets smaller and smaller, it gets more difficult. So I would say that's the toughest part, is just dealing with the computer every day and trying to actually get the stories written and sent out, in a timely fashion.
I think we all sort of in the disability community battle with our challenges. And I think, people take sight for granted and they say, oh, I can see every day, until you can't. And then you have to, battle the elements to which you're given. And I think, that's sort of where the sometimes annoying phrase can be, oh, you're an inspiration. But I think to the general public, it's meant well that, we do inspire people, and we do, show them that, hey, even though I had sight at the beginning of my career, in your case, I'm still doing it with minimal sight.
It's funny though, the inspiration thing, because I do get that a lot, and I say to people, I say, well, what's my choice?
In that vein, how do you feel the disability community is represented in hockey in general? Do you feel it's a good place? And let's, because you work in Ontario, let's focus on hockey in Ontario. How do you feel the disability community is represented, good or bad?
It's interesting because, I'm discovering things as I go along here. And certainly, I'm not aware of other people doing the same thing that I am, in Ontario anyways. So as an example, this year when the Petes were in the OHL final, I was dealing with people at the league who, asking them if they could make certain accommodations for me to kind of help me do the job, right? And they bent over backwards to do it. So from the Peterborough Petes organization to the Ontario Hockey League to the London Knights media staff, when I went up to a couple games in London during the final, like, they did whatever they could to accommodate me and help me do my job. And the same thing at the Memorial Cup. So I don't know that, necessarily, is that we're represented in the terms of having a lot of people in those positions in the hockey world. But I've certainly found that, the people that I've come across are very accommodating and try to help you in any way they can to do your job. But on the flip side of it in the hockey world is when I was really getting to a point where I was having trouble recognizing people, and people were going to start noticing in the workplace that I had a vision issue, because for many years nobody knew there was anything wrong because it wasn't noticeable. But when it became noticeable, I wrote a first-person article about it, just to say, maybe my thinking was, well, maybe I won't have to explain myself as much if people just understand what I'm going through. And so when I wrote that article, kind of lost my train of thought of where I was going with that, but certainly, I remember. So one of the things I wrote in the article was that I really miss playing hockey because I had to give up playing hockey. I felt like, when you're the guy that doesn't see very well on your line and they're passing you the puck and you're losing it, you feel like you're letting your team down, right? So I just stopped playing and just playing recreational hockey at the time. But and then I got an email from a guy who said, no, you don't have to quit playing hockey. There's a Blind Hockey Association. And it was very small at the time. It was just a group of people that were getting together in Toronto on a semi-regular basis and playing hockey with a special puck and a few modified rules. But they created their own association that has grown, and it's now across the country. They have a national championship every year where they bring people from all across the country together to play games against each other. And so there's certainly people in the field, in the space, that are trying to make blind hockey available for people that are going through what we are.
Blind hockey is such a great sport, and we've gotten to cover it many times here at AMI. And the first time I got to cover it, I you roll into the venue and you just realize, gee, I'm covering hockey, and you don't even know that individuals are blind and partially sighted. Like, it's just, It's standard hockey. They're competitive. They want to play. It's really great. And I think that's sort of a misnomer of blind hockey. People in the public kind of step back and say, wait, they're blind, and they expect a different level of hockey that's just not existent, and it's not there. It's competitive hockey, and it's great. And now there's a national team and recreational teams. It's wonderful.
You talk about the misnomer. Like, I had a misnomer myself. I thought, I was probably in my late 40s when I played it for the first time, but I'd played hockey my whole life, right? And wasn't like an all-star hockey player, but I could survive in a men's league, right? And so I thought to myself, okay, I can't play as well as I used to because I'm losing my sight, but I'm going to see better than some of the people I'm going to play against. And I've been playing hockey probably, at a different level than a lot of these people are. So I thought, I'll probably be one of the best players out there, right? Yeah. And I got my eyes open pretty damn quickly that because they said, the better players tend to play forward, and for lack of a better word, the weaker players play on defense. And I thought, well, no, I'll be a forward. You'll stick me at forward and whatever. And then after the first game, I'm thinking, I should probably slide back to defense.
It happens. Parasports can humble you real quick.
Now, the Peterborough Petes had some really great success this year, and they finished 4th in the Eastern Conference and had to beat some really good teams on their way to the Memorial Cup, including the North Bay Battalion and the London Knights. What do you think led to their success this year?
They knew it's kind of like, well, if we're going to make a run for it, it's sort of now or never, right? And And so what they did through the course of the year is they went and they made some fairly significant high-profile trades, and they brought in players, two that had played for Canada at the World Juniors, and a couple of players that were on the championship team for the Hamilton Bulldogs last year. And so when they made those trades in January, they were sitting in third place. They had an 8-game winning streak they were on, and people thought, wow, look at the trades they made. They're going to be, maybe the favorites now to win the OHL. And then they proceeded to go 14-16-1 for the rest of the regular season. And they weren't living up to their potential at all. And people were scratching their heads thinking, why are these guys not doing better? And fans in Peterborough were really starting to question, like, where's this team going? And so I would say that where they ended up in the regular season, 4th in their conference, 10th overall in the league, was not really indicative of what they had on paper. And a lot of people said, well, they're not just going to flick a switch come playoff time and everything's going to come together. But that's pretty much what happened.
I got to tell you, I was in London. I live in Kitchener, and I was in London for the OHL final. I was blessed to go to all of the London Knights home games. And I have to be honest that in London, the conversation during that series when they won game 1 was, oh, they'll be fine. London will do it. And then Peterborough just started picking away. And then they won. And I think it shocked a lot of people. And they did it again at the Memorial Cup, where they sort of had a slow start in the first couple of games. And then they were able to force a tiebreaker. And there was some discussion of like, oh, this is an example of, the poor reason for a tiebreaker and blah, blah, blah. And then the Peterborough Petes won the tiebreaker and they went all the way to the semifinal and were competitive. So what do you think, if we look at the Memorial Cup, like, what do you think led to their success even after a slow start?
A couple of things. I think their slow start, first of all, they're all good teams out there, for one thing, right? So I don't think that it was a surprise that any one of those teams would beat one of the others on any given night. But I think, Peterborough, when you look at who all the teams played to get there, I think Peterborough maybe had the toughest schedule, and playing teams like Ottawa, North Bay, and London, I think the quality of those teams was as good as anything that anybody faced in the finals of their leagues, let alone in the quarterfinals and the semifinals as well. So I think they had a really tough road to get there. And then quick turnaround to get out there. You're dealing with the travel, you're dealing with the time difference. And then they had back-to-back games to start the tournament. And, they kind of hung with Seattle in the first game. It was tied going into the third period, and then it sort of slipped away on them. And then to play the next night against a team that had rested the day before, I think everything just sort of hit them at once, and they ended up being embarrassed 10-2 against Kamloops. And again, there was consternation in Peterborough about, well, are they just going to go 3 games and out and sort of, prove to people maybe they weren't as good as everyone thought they were in the playoffs. And so they redeemed themselves by beating Quebec. They were the only team that beat Quebec who went on to win the Memorial Cup. And then they got Kamloops, who had embarrassed them, and they came back and beat Kamloops in overtime. And I guess kind of redeemed themselves. But I would say it was a combination of, they had good players and a good team, and they had a fair amount of character and guys that were willing to persevere through some tough times. And I think that all was part of what allowed them to redeem themselves a bit there in Kamloops.
The team plays in the Memorial Centre, and they have done so since 1956. Can you maybe talk a little bit about the arena and what makes it so iconic?
It's one of the oldest rinks in the OHL. It's not the oldest. Sudbury's a little bit older than the Memorial Centre, but the Sudbury's never won an OHL championship. Peterborough's won 10 of them. So I think when you enter the building, there's a lot of history there. You see the banners, you see things that they've done to recognize different alumni through the year. They've got photos of every team stretched along one wall in the arena that, I think a lot of people that are visitors to the rink spend hours sometimes just going through the different photos and recognizing the different players that played for the Petes that went on to the NHL. And so there's a certain amount of history to it. It's a unique building, the layout of it, the structure of the building itself is very unique. There's nothing like it in the OHL. And so it has a certain charm maybe that like the Maple Leaf Gardens or the Montreal Forum had because of their age and their history. At the same time, like, there's people that look at it and go, well, you could never replace that. You can never find a new building. And a lot of people that think we don't need a new building, but it is old,
There's that level of, listen, it's an iconic building, and because of its age, that's what makes it iconic. But then you got to look at it and say the iconic outweighs the revenue, the age of the building, the pipes, the things like that. And at some point you got to look at it and say, we need a new building regardless of the iconic nature of it.
I think this recent playoff run where they were selling out at 4,000 and couldn't fit another body in the building, was generated the drumbeat a little bit from the team saying, we could have fit another 2,000 people in there, but we didn't have the room, and so it's time for a new building. And I think that's you're going to see that become a topic of conversation in the next little while here in Peterborough. Some people say, oh, it's got so much history, I don't want to replace it, but other people saying, it's time to get into the modern era, right?
But I think time does hit everything, no matter it's iconic or not. Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview. We greatly appreciate it. And we'll have you on again down the line when Peterborough goes on its next run, hopefully next season.
It was my pleasure.
If you want to get a hold of us by voicemail because you liked what you heard on this interview or anything else we've done on the program, here's how you can get a hold of us by voicemail.
If you want to leave a message for the Neutral Zone, call now 1-866-509-4545. And don't forget to give us permission to use your message on the air. Let's get ready to leave a voicemail.
All right, so I wanted to start this segment. We talked about it in our headlines where you can go to get the event, the International Wheelchair Basketball Federation World Championships in Dubai. At the time of recording, here's what we know. The women started their event and played Brazil, and they defeated Brazil 61-56. And then on Monday, the women played again, and unfortunately, they lost to Spain 70-65 was the final score in that game. Cameron, the thing here in this game was that the women shot less than 50% at the free throw line, and to me, that was the real difference in this game. That's you got to make your free throws, and I think that when we look back at the event, however Canada does moving forward, that's something we're going to look towards. And any thoughts on that before I give you the men's results?
Yeah, no, you hit it on the nail there, Brock. I would say that if you're hitting less than or just around 50% for your free throws, you're not going to win too many basketball games that way. You definitely got to hit a lot of your free throws in order to win it, and you got to get your points from the field as well. So that's kind of the most important part, especially playing wheelchair basketball. And, they're free throws, so it's not anyone guarding you or anyone with hands up in the air to block a shot, and you've got to hit more of those than you don't.
Yeah, for sure. Coach Marnie Adams didn't look very impressed throughout the last quarter. I will tell you that the game was tied after the first quarter. It was tied after the second quarter. It was tied after the third quarter. And then Spain took over a little bit. But again, it was that quarter that you really saw the free throws suffer. If we look on the men's side, they were defeated by Germany 65-52 in their first game. They were just simply outplayed by Germany. They were bigger, they were faster, they were more physical, and it just really looked like they were overmatched by Germany. If we look at their second game on the men's side, they played Thailand, and they had a much better game against Thailand. It was 83-55. This was a real important game because you only have a three-team round robin in which to make things work. So, that's what you need. Canada will need a win against Egypt to have hopes in advancing. I'm not sure if it's the top 1 or 2 with the way that the pools are so designated. So Canada will definitely need that second win to advance through. But man, when you get off to a tough start in your first game against Germany, it's kind of hard to pick yourself off the mat, Cameron, and say, we got to do this. So it's good to see that Canada did that.
Yeah, and I think that their second game against, it was Thailand, there's no reason why you shouldn't beat them. I don't see them being a powerhouse in wheelchair basketball. So that's a team that you've got to beat, and they did that, and quite handily.
Yeah, for sure. So that's a little bit of the look at the wheelchair basketball World Championships. If you want to go back and you missed our headlines, we gave you some pretty succinct detail on where you can go to catch the games, and it's going on through the 20th of June, so another week or so before we crown a champion, and we wish both the men's and women's team a bunch of success. Let's stick in the world of basketball, but this time we're going to chat a little bit about the mainstream sports world. We have a situation where the Denver Nuggets are up 3-1, and we have seen that Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray have really been the driving force behind Denver and what they've done, but their team as a whole just looks really clean, really succinct, really good. And so I think by the time we record another episode, and even maybe by the time this episode gets released, we might have a champion. Cameron, before you weigh in with your thoughts, I want to give you some stats on Nikola Jokic, which are playoff statistics, and it's just absolutely ridiculous what I'm going to read you. He has 500 points, 250 rebounds, and 150 assists. When I read that to you, what does that mean to Cameron?
Well, without looking at, how long did it take him to get those? Was it just this year in the playoffs, or is that his overall playoff career?
The stat that I saw said in the playoffs, so I'm not sure if they meant this year, but I think in the playoffs in general, because I can't see him scoring 500 points in one playoff. So I would think that if the statistic I'm looking at, it says in the playoffs. So I think we're looking at career statistics as I look it up on the fly.
Yeah, it's still a hell of a lot of points, and he's a triple-double machine, and I saw a statistic, I just can't remember how many triple-doubles he's had just for this playoffs alone, but the guy is a wizard at the end of the day, and I'm not talking Washington Wizard, just like a wizard. He's just unbelievable, and everything goes through him, and Jamal Murray kind of sets everything up as well, and Denver, I could see them being the next great team for the next few years, because I don't see a lot of other teams being able to overtake Denver with the way that they've played this playoffs. They're just a phenomenal team, and it's great teamwork, and the passing is great too, and that's really good to see because you like people or teams to share the ball. And when you're sharing the ball, you're getting other people involved, and obviously your big dogs are going to be your big dogs, but they're playing really good basketball right now.
It was game 4. I was watching, and this was when I realized, before the stat that I just read to you came out, this was the moment that I realized Nikola Jokic is unbelievable. He, the Miami Heat scored a 3. They brought the score down to an 8-point deficit. Nikola Jokic went down the floor, and he is a tall, big man. He's over 6 foot. He's a tall, big man. Really a Jolly Green Giant. And this was the moment that I thought, wow. They brought it down to an 8-point deficit, and he drops a 3. Big, giant guy like Nikola Jokic drops a 3, and just sort of gives you that stab in the heart and says, yeah, you thought you were going to get back in this game, and you thought I'm a big, giant, burly man, and that, we wouldn't be here. He drops a 3. Like, it's just unbelievable what one person can do in the sport of basketball, and they have 2, and some further depth beyond that too.
Oh God,
but
yes.
Just the 2 mainstays in Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray. You can have one guy run your team in basketball. When you have 2, look out.
Oh, absolutely. And with Jokic, like, he's the center as well, and before, the center was just always underneath the basket and slam dunk or sky hook, or like, that's the way the game used to be played. But with the new way that basketball has been playing, anybody can go out to the 3-point line and, sink a 3-pointer now. And that's how the game is played now. And it's, in one sense, it's interesting because if your 3 ball isn't falling, they just keep trying. And sometimes it bothers me to no end that when the 3 ball isn't working, that you don't go low and that you don't get the easier baskets or, the 2-pointers, because if you're able to get the 2-pointers, for every 2 baskets, it's more than the 3-pointer. But if your 3-pointers aren't working, man, go to that basket and get your 2-pointers.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. That's the part in basketball that I feel like when I watch it, I'm beating my head sometimes, because we talk about analytics in sports, and I think, in basketball, it's not so much about analytics, whereas it's like some athletes will look and say, oh, I can get 3 points versus 2, and so 3 is a bigger number than 2, as I do my best impression of the count here. But I think we get stuck in the whole, oh, this is more than that. Whereas you bring up, play a little bit of defense, score a couple of 2s, and that does much better than missing a 3 or making, 1 of every 5 or 6. There's teams that can do better than that, of course, and games you can do better. But it's so different in basketball, and I do agree with you. I think they stick to the well a bit longer than they should. And when you have a big man that can, pass the ball, shoot the ball, you are one scary team. And I would imagine by the time we record next week, there will be an NBA champion, and it's probably going to be the Denver Nuggets. I will say, though, gotta love Kyle Lowry, 37 years old, still plays with a bunch of energy, dives on the floor for balls, doesn't matter if they're up, down, whatever. He is a guy who puts it all on the line and says, we're going to do this. Bam Adebayo, Jimmy Butler, you got to credit what they've tried to do in this playoffs. They come in as the 8th seed, and I just think they've met their match here, Cameron, and it's pretty sad because I'm still a Kyle guy. I love Kyle Lowry.
Yeah, and he's on the he's on the bench now, but he brings a lot to that bench when he's out there. He's still got the same heart and desire. Like you say, he dives for balls. He'll do anything for the team. Before in Toronto, he was great at taking a charge as well, which really helps.
Still does that every once in a while.
Yeah, and that's really good as well. And at 37, to be that all in when your body is starting to break down. Like Kyle Lowry, can't say enough about him. He's really helped that second unit to be a good unit when playing. And what can you say about Jimmy Butler? He left the 76ers to come to Miami because he loved Pat Riley and he loved the no-nonsense, work hard mentality of Miami. And that's why he went to Miami. And I think he's a great leader there as well. And Bam Adebayo, another great athlete, great basketball player. But they've run into the Denver Nuggets, and I just think Denver Nuggets is the better team.
I can hear the audience out there saying, yeah, but Miami's an an 8th seed. Okay. We have to give Miami a bit more credit than what we're doing, because what they've run up against is just a beast that no one's touching. I don't think, if Boston, if Milwaukee did what they should have done at the top of the East and got there, well, I don't think we're having much of a different result. Denver is a real good team and a real well coached by Mike Malone, and just it's unbelievable watching what they've done. And so I don't necessarily agree with the whole they're an 8th seed and we finally see it. No.
But everyone loves the underdog, Brock. It's just like in the NHL playoffs with the Florida Panthers. They came in as a 8th seed, and now they're in the Stanley Cup Finals. So everyone loves the underdog. And Miami, I wouldn't even consider them an underdog because they probably shouldn't have been in 8th place. They probably should have played better during the regular season, so they were a higher seed. But they ended up where they were, and they're in the finals. So.
Yeah, they are in the final, and they deserve the all the flowers that they have gotten. And I think at some point when you win 1 round, 2 rounds, 3 rounds, and you get to the NBA final, you deserve the credit you get. And I don't think there's some portions of the sports world that looks at it and says, they're an 8th seed. I don't think that's fair. And I think when we look at this and say this all around, I think Miami deserves a very well 2nd place. And it's not over yet as we record this, but it certainly looks like it at this juncture in time.
And in 5 years from now, Brock, is anyone going to remember that Miami, if Miami comes back and wins this series, is anybody going to remember that they were an 8th seed 5 years from now? I won't remember.
No, I think the number beside the team and what they came in with doesn't really matter to people in the grand scheme of things. It does when we're going into the playoffs, because we think that gives us, a competitive advantage, 1 versus 8. That's how we do the matchups, and we talk about. But at the end of the day, when we get to the end of the game and the end of the playoffs, we don't look at the number beside the team because they earned it and they deserve it. So yeah, I just think that's where we are. Cameron, I want to squeeze in a little bit about the NHL Stanley Cup Final. We see another team in the Vegas Golden Knights who are just being led and run, and it's wonderful to see. It's great. I enjoy it. Jonathan Marchessault is playing unbelievable for the Vegas Golden Knights. Aiden Hill in goal, who's really a 4th string goaltender, you could argue. He is proving. You want to talk about a number beside a guy? This guy's saying, I don't care what number you want to give me. I'm going to play. Your thoughts on this series and what you've seen? Yeah,
it's been a phenomenal series. And, for teams that get criticized as far as going over the salary cap with LTIR and so on and so forth, that's what Vegas has done. But it's part of the rules. So they have a phenomenal lineup. And they're playing within the rules. So I want to say something bad about them as far as how they got there, but I can't really because it's within the rules at the end of the day. So how can you say anything, too bad, because they have a really good team. And the goaltender, Aiden Hill, who saw that coming?
Yeah.
I sure as hell didn't. And, but at the same time, Florida Panthers, they're down 3-1 at the time of recording. And it just so happened that the first round series against the Boston Bruins, they were also down 3-1. And we all know what happened in that series to beat the President's Trophy winners. So this series is far from over, I'm thinking.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I actually didn't really think about that, them being down 3-1 in the past in these playoffs. We haven't seen a lot from Sam Bennett. Matthew Tkachuk seems to be playing at, put the percentage here. He's not at 100%. He's had a bit of a shoulder injury. And the argument could be made, listen, you shouldn't be playing when you have that level of injury. Listen, you need a Matthew Tkachuk out there at whatever level he can give you. If he's able to play, he just demands that kind of respect, and who knows what happens
Oh, he's the MVP for the Florida Panthers. If they end up coming back and winning this series, I think Tkachuk is the MVP and or Bobrovsky. But Bobrovsky, I think, is kind of hitting a brick wall now and is not the Bobrovsky that has been the last 3 series that he's done so well in.
If we were to look at the last 3 series and look at the way, Florida played and were really some world beaters and giant killers, I would take the Leafs out of the giant killer category. But I would have told you Sergei Bobrovsky is the MVP if they win. I'm not so sure I say that now, even if they come back and win. You have to give it to a Matthew Tkachuk, a Sam Bennett, somebody like that. Sergei Bobrovsky has not been at Vezina caliber in this series, and that's just a fact. Not yet.
But if they come back and he ends up getting a shutout in the next 3 games in a row, you may be in part of the conversation. But let's kind of go with reality here, or what I think reality is going to be, and Vegas is going to win it. Who's your MVP for Vegas?
It's got to be Adin Hill. It has to be Adin Hill without a doubt. I would disagree with you, because I'm thinking either Marchessault, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. He's gotten a lot of big goals in order to be able to win the games, or even his centerman, Mark
Eichel.
Stone, too.
That's
another one.
I was going to say Eichel.
Yeah.
He demanded that to trade out. I guess he demanded a trade out of Buffalo because he didn't want to go with the surgery that Buffalo suggested, and that was a great get for Vegas. Last year they didn't even make the playoffs, and now they're 1 game away from being Stanley Cup champions. So it's what a turnaround for Vegas.
100%. I was really highly critical of Vegas and what they did, and as an expansion team you should never be where you are, etc., etc. If they win the Stanley Cup, and even if they don't, I am hereby saying, Vegas, you deserve what you've done. The atmosphere is what it is. You've built a franchise. I know that's not the rules of expansion, and some would say that you didn't do as well as you did, but I am hereby telling you, as the host of the Neutral Zone, Brock Richardson, I have been wrong. As I raise my hand up here, I have been wrong about Vegas and what they've done. What I'm not wrong about is that is the end of our show for this week. I'd like to thank Cam Jenkins. I'd also like to thank Jordan Steves, who was our technical producer, filling in for Mark Aflalo. Ryan Delahanty is the podcast coordinator. Tune in next week, because you just never know what happens when you enter the Neutral Zone. Be safe, be well.